introduction to PyTorch. PyTorch is a framework that is used by data scientists, data engineers, or even software engineers and developers to to build artificial intelligence models. So you can build anything starting from machine learning, computer vision, audio, and natural language processing. So let's go to the website. It's pytorch.org, and the way you install it is pretty simple. So you just click on this install, and depending on your computer, depending on your system, if I have to go with mine, I use Windows, and I want to use pip install for my installation. And I definitely don't, my computer is not that fast, so I only have a CPU. So here is uh, the command that you have to run on your command line, tapping CMD. When you tap CMD, you run your environment, your virtual environment. You kind of create your virtual environment and you run this on your virtual environment. If you haven't seen any my video about virtual environments, I encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and look for how to install Python and create your virtual environment. So back to PyTorch. So here you can see that I just ran this import this import function. This import code, and here's the version. So it's showing you the version 8.8.1 plus CPU because I'm running that on my local machine. Um, so you can actually know what is the default D type, which is float32. This means that in anything that get into a tensor is defaulted to float32. Now, how do you create a tensor? You can actually start with creating a list of lists. So you have two lists in this single list, and then your tensor um, will take your list of lists, and when you print the results, you will see how it looks like. Let me see. I should remove this piece of code here. So you can see here that you have a tensor. Uh, Here's how your tensor look like. Um, and then sometimes you deal with numpy arrays, you deal with pandas, and sometimes you can you can get confused about what type of array you're dealing with. So you have to use the torch that is tensor to to check that. So you have true. Now, how do you count the number of element in the tensor? So you have to use the numel method, which is very explanatory, which is 12. So you have 6 elements in the first array and six other elements in the second array. So this is, by the way, this is a two-dimensional array because you can see two brackets, okay? Um, so PyTorch is pretty similar to NumPy. If you have used NumPy before for array processing on the CPU, you guys already know how NumPy work is very useful for linear algebra. The PyTorch, it does run uh, much faster than NumPy, but it does about the same thing that NumPy does. Um, so how do you initialize a tensor? Here you have a piece of code that serves the purpose. All you have to do is create a tensor with initial values, uh, pretty much, and this is how you have. So you have the number of, you're supposed to have 3 rows and 4 columns. So when I say initial value, of course, it's an empty tensor. So 3 rows and 4 columns. This is how your tensor looks like. Pretty straightforward. By the way, if as I'm talking about the PyTorch, there's also another framework called Tensorflow, which is created by Google. Um, Tensorflow seems a little bit more complicated in terms of codes. And if you use to Python, I highly recommend that you start with PyTorch because PyTorch can do exactly the same thing that TensorFlow does, and PyTorch originates from Facebook. So uh, back to our back to our Tensorflow, Pytorch, to create some random numbers, right? With 3 rows and 3 columns, this is how it looks like. So you have rain, you use the torch.rain um, to do that. And so you want, say for instance, you want to change the type of your tensor, right? So this is how you do it. You go from, I mean, you have the int tensor, which means turn your tensor into an integer form, because you guys know that I already show you that the default is floats, right? So if you want to change to integers, you have to do int tensor. It's pretty much similar to the d type as d type in pandas. All right, so sometimes you may want to create a short tensor depending on the your situation, and this is so you have to use the torch tensor method to do this. Um, and another way to get a tensor with less memory size, besides short tensor, is just to change the type of the tensor here, um, and that's what you get. All right, so say for instance you have some a tensor, right, an empty tensor, and you want to feed it with value, right? So you have to um, to use torch that full um, to do that. And how do you want to feed those value? You want to feed those value with specific values. This will work. Field value equals 1. Okay. Um, so this is yeah, of course, because you want to get a tensor of 1. We already went over the d type. You can also specify the type of values that you want to have in your tensor. Um, and this is what you get. So you can change the type to integer. Now, if you want to get a tensor of zero value, so it's pretty simple. So what you have to do is use the zero like and pass um, the the tensor init. I think let me see. Let me go back a little bit. Tensor integer. Oh yeah. So um, this is how pretty much you get a tensor of 0 using the zero like method. Say for instance you want to get a diagonal matrix, 4 by 4 diagonal matrix. You have to use the torch.i. Um, and what it does is it's gonna create a matrix of diagonal matrix with 1 on the diagonal. Pretty simple as well. Um, say for instance you want to create a a tensor with value different than 0. This is what you do. You use the non-zero method. um, so what it does it turns your your tensor, actually, so you have it gives you pretty much, it's like an index, right? It gives you the location or the position of your non-zero value. So here you can see that the location of this one right here is on the row 0 and in column 0. Because you all know that in Python you always start with the first element is always 0. So this is the first one, this is the second one, this is the third one, this is the fourth one. It's pretty much you passing this this tensor to check the indices. All right. So we already went over that tensor. You can turn anything into a tensor, list of lists into a tensor. We already went over that, but I'm gonna run it. um, Now let's see. Oh yeah, how do you feel missing values in a tensor? It's pretty simple. It's gonna be tensor that fill. It's gonna be tensor that fill. and you can fill those values with 0.5. So this is what you get, and this is very useful, by the way. It's like like a fill and in panda. All right, so um, say for instance you want to add 40 to every element in the tensor random field that we just talked about. It's pretty simple. You have to add the add method, and it's gonna give you 4.5 on every numbers. Now, pretty simple operation, taking the square roots of each tensor, of each tensor, yep. Every element in the tensor, you use the square root function. So it's gonna take, what it's gonna do is you pass the tensor, and then you take the square root of each one. I know we had tensor that random somewhere here, right? And I should have put the tensor random field anyway. So, but anyway, so this is how how the square roots of any tensor look like. Yeah, so if you want to generate evenly spaced between 1 and 30 of 15 values, this is what you get. This is what you do. You use the line space the line space method on the Pytorch. Um, let's see what's interesting here. Yeah, so you have you can have an instance where you have some chunks of tensor. Let me first create a tensor chunk here. One second. Let me create a tensor chunk. So pretty much this tensor chunk, this you can see here how this tensor splits the the above tensor, okay, split the above tensor into rows, right? So you want to have three rows. You pass this tensor, this is a tensor, and you want to pass three rows, okay? So you kind of want to split those tensors um, into three separate tensors. That's so you use the chunk function here. Now that I have this tensor chunk, what I want to do, so how do you get the first tensor? You just have to uh, slice it to create an index, and use 0 to capture the first element, 1 to capture the second element. So what if, so this is how you get different chunks. Now, say for instance, I want to create a third chunk, um, and I pass these values. I can concatenate those chunks and get my tensor, another tensor back. So if I run this, I concatenate, I get one single tensor back instead of chunks. So again, to explode the tensor into three different chunks, or three different chunks, I use the chunk method, and then to combine them back together into one, I use the cat method. So and um, what else? Um, yeah, I think this is to get the second element back, um, like we had before. You can see here that you can, and this is amazing because you can get back uh, the. So this, no, this is a tensor chunk. Yep, this is uh, very similar to NumPy and pandas. So you can extract any element of your tensor. All right, so how about indexing tensors? So I have a tensor here that I just created, and this is how it looks like. What if I want to get a specific element? I want to get 5. So 5 is the second row, which is 1, because you start with 0 and 1, and then the second column, which is 0 and 1. So it falls into 1 and 1, so that's what you get. Now, if you want to get all the rows starting with the second element, and all the columns starting with the second element, you will see that you will get a subset of the first tensor that you have. So it's going to start with, so you want to start with 1 going down, and 1 going to the right. So it's going to take 5 and 6, pretty much the intersection. All right, so a method that is very useful is the size of a tensor. What are the dimensions of the tensor? So you can see that this tensor is dimension 3 and 3, okay? And then the view, which is used very often in artificial intelligence, is the view function, which helps you manipulate or view your tensor in a different way. Um, so I have my tensor already. This is how it looks like, right? So, but you want to change the shape of your tensor. So instead of a 3 by 3, you want a 1 by 9. View can be a little intimidating at first, but you just have to know how the tensor looks like at first, so you can change the view at any time. So this is how it works. So you have your values, and what you just did is you just put those value into just one row, one single row, and then you can do the reverse. This is going to be a you know kind of vertical shape, um, and then if you want to change the shape of your tensor, you can use the unsqueeze method, and that's how it's going to look like. So you want, for example, to use my tensor, and then have um, and then have that you want to change the shape. So you have the first row turn into, so you have this first row turn into kind of, I'm not gonna say column, but you change pretty much the shape of your tensor, right? So you only have some scalars, right? And then you have the same thing here, and then the same thing here. So this is how the unsqueeze method work. Very useful. And then if you want to get the shape of this tensor, all right, the dimension changes, because here you don't have just row and column, but you have a third dimension. Um, so you have to so this pretty much says, well, you have three chunks, okay, one, two, three, okay, and within each of those three, and this is the number of rows, and within each of those three, you can count one, one, two, three element, okay, and then all this is within a single tensor. That's what the third dimension is. So three rows, okay, three chunks, three subtensors, if you want to call it that way, okay, which stand for this, and then all these tensors are assembled into one big tensor, which is dimension one. So this is how the dimension look like, and then uh, this is the original the original tensor that we had. Now, what if you want to transpose your tensor? This is very easy in Pytorch. So you have to use the dot transpose of my tensor, and then use these parameters 0 and 1, and that's what you get. So the rows become the columns, and the column become the rows. So you had 10H30 as a column, but this column as a row, but this row become a column, as you can see. So I hope that you guys enjoy this tutorial of PyTorch. Um, uh, Give me a thumbs up if you liked this video, and I would appreciate if you subscribe to my channel for more content. And in the next video, I'm going to talk about how a neuron work. We're going to get deeper into deep learning. But I'm going to show you how a neuron work, and then we're going to do some deep learning stuff. Okay. Hope to talk to you guys soon. Bye bye.